For 150 years, they've wanted a ballroom here. We're going to have the finest ballroom, I believe, anywhere in the world. It's going to cost right in the neighborhood of $300 million. It's been expanded and made absolutely. It'll be the most beautiful ballroom anywhere in the world, I think. I think it'll be one of the most beautiful ballrooms, maybe the most beautiful ballroom anywhere in the world. I'm doing a ballroom now. I've been with the astronauts. I've been with contractors because we're trying to get the ballroom built. Just like we're ahead of schedule on the ballroom, in a much bigger way, we're ahead of schedule with Iran.
I mean, there's a piece of me that's like, pad the walls, take the phone, give him his effing ballroom, Ian. I mean, like we have never heard him talk. I mean, did you see all the words on the back of that piece of paper in the first clip? Like, there are meetings about the ballroom. There is an ability to focus on the ballroom. There is a message on the ballroom. There is a cognizance of the global presence of ballrooms. Imagine, like now do poverty, then do peace, then try NATO, and how about economic prosperity for the poor? I mean, I have never seen him. I've covered him every day, and they'll study my brain when I'm dead for 10 years. I have never seen him focus on anything like he's focused on the ballroom.
I think you hit on something as a former advisor to a president, which is free political advice for him, which is the ballroom is deeply unpopular. But if he made it a padded room, it might all of a sudden skyrocket in popularity. And look, I mean, you know, this funny stuff is actually quite serious. As we were talking about before the break, mockery is a really, really important and powerful political tool. There's a wonderful book by one of the organizers of the Serbian movement, Otpor, that toppled Slobodan Milosevic, Sergej Popovic. His book is called Blueprint for Revolution, and it's all about how mockery has been effectively used against these sort of autocratic leaders all over the world to great effect. And I think we've been seeing it here. If you think about the people in the inflatable dinosaur costumes who are out there protesting, you know, sort of ISIS atrocities, it makes it very hard for, you know, sort of militarized strongman forces to be feared and taken seriously when they're being mocked in that way. And I think, you know, that's the proper way to respond to some of this as we're doing here. I couldn't help but notice when Trump was holding up those pictures of his golden arches, his big arch, of the scene in Spinal Tap, you know, when Christopher Guest and David St. Hubbins want a gigantic Stonehenge, but they can't tell how to write the word inches and feet properly. And so they end up with a giant Stonehenge that's only about, 12 inches tall. And I think that's what Trump is going to get, because as Ben Wittes of Lawfare, I think, unforgettably coined, Trump is malevolence tempered by incompetence. And so what he may end up getting in the long run of history is an arch that he's holding in his hands that's just about that big, that gets trampled by the marching feet of democracy from here ever after.
I mean, I want to associate with everything you've just said, Ian. I mean, I think there's a political strategy in here, too, that isn't being realized or carried on. And I sort of joked yesterday that every Democrat should make that picture of Trump with this crumpled up picture of the ballroom their image. I mean, and then the rest of us can do the people who brought their democracy back from the brink in Hungary, or the people who are now again going to have to fight for voting rights in America because of the Supreme Court decision yesterday, or the people who are now doing in the private sector what the USAID used to do in our country's name to save the most vulnerable people in Africa and around the world. I mean, there is a seriousness in Trump's commitment to building a ballroom that we should not mistakenly treat it as a side thing. That is the focus of the President of the United States, with 13 American service members dead in a war that he began in Iran. And based on reporting, none of his cabinet thought it was a good idea. He sat across from another country's foreign leader. None of his cabinet has been able to articulate to Congress or the country the purpose for the war. The three things that are on the table based on Axios reporting don't point to a strategy either. One involves the nuclear program, one involves the Strait of Hormuz, and the other just involves bombing infrastructure. I mean, people should take the seriousness. He's now talked about the ballroom with more seriousness, more planning, more, things on paper waving around than he's talked about the war.
Yeah, well, I think Senator John Ossoff put up recently a really effective campaign ad that I think quite seriously makes the important point that what we are spending money on in this country under President Donald Trump is $25 billion on an ill-conceived war of choice in Iran, on this ballroom that either is being paid for by taxpayers, as we now learn, or else by sort of the corrupt contributions of people trying to, line the pockets of Trump and his family in some way. And what we are not spending money on is helping people afford medicine, helping people afford healthcare. In fact, we're allowing those benefits to be cut. This is a president who came to office promising that he would help people with the increasing cost of living and is doing nothing about the walls in which the American people need to live, and is doing everything about a gilded ballroom in which he wants to fet his billionaire partners and donors. And I think at the end of the day, that is the serious decision for the American people to make in November, which is whether that is a course they want to continue on, because that is the course that the Republican Party right now is abetting, or whether we want to change course and get back in the business of supporting the American people.
The other projects, if it's ballroom, for 500, it's, prosecuting your enemies for 200. And the absolute obsession with manufacturing crimes to take before grand juries and one-sided presentations of something Jonathan Turley described as making up a crime in an op-ed yesterday, Tom Nichols. I mean, this is the whole poo-poo platter of authoritarian, sort of crack tin pot dictator. I don't know if it's fair to authoritarians to call this all authoritarian conduct, but certainly the full-fledged dictator that the three top generals warned about in the last term.
And the real worry here is that people have gotten used to it and they're not taking it seriously. We laugh at the ballroom, we laugh at the arch. The war in Iran and the ballroom are the same thing. They are both monuments to Donald Trump's vanity. We didn't go into Iran because there was a pressing national security need. The people around him you can see them, sweating bullets trying to explain why it was necessary. But in fact, Donald Trump thought he was going to be the great liberator and get another statue somewhere. The ballroom, the arch, the war. And I worry that too many people have said, well, it's not that important. It's just how it is. It seems like the only thing that's breaking through is that all of this craziness has raised the cost of living and gas prices. But the message needs to be that this is destructive, not only to your way of life, which, it is, and to your pocketbook and to your household, but that a deeply disturbed human, this is not normal.
Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. There were two kings in the White House today, according to the White House. That was the message the administration put out into the world today as Donald Trump met with King Charles III of Great Britain. You see them there just moments ago entering the White House for dinner. It is ostensibly all to mark America's 250 years of independence from royal rule. And the White House put out this photo of the two men on stage with the words, two kings and a crown emoji. They're trolling, yes, but not really. We all know Trump's kingly demands. He wants a ballroom built and his enemies persecuted. And as both of these whims dominated the headlines today, millions of Americans learned about the other breaking news, the real stuff. Today, U.S. gas prices hit their highest level since Trump launched his ridiculous, counterproductive war on Iran. A single-day jump of 1.6%. The average cost for a gallon of regular gasoline is now $4.18, according to the AAA. It's wholly gone up because of Donald Trump launching the war. There's nothing else happening that it made it jump that much. And it's just the most tangible example of all the ways that Trump and the Republican Party have acted affirmatively at almost every crossroads to make prices higher for people. When all anyone says in any poll or focus group across the political spectrum is, for the love of God, things are too expensive. That includes today in the New York Times, where a dozen unhappy Trump voters shared their concerns. Quote, life is becoming more and more unaffordable. Prices are high as ever. We're headed in the wrong direction. Those were Trump's voters. And all he and Republicans are doing with the power those voters gave them in Washington is finding new ways to make things more expensive. It's truly astounding. Late last week, the CEO of United Airlines said on an earnings call the company was already jacking ticket prices as much as 20% to offset rising fuel prices from the war in Iran, the ongoing closure of the Strait of Hormuz. Today, the CEO of the European airline Ryanair said fuel costs could break much of the commercial air industry in Europe within months.
If pricing stays higher for longer this summer, we think a number of our airline competitors in Europe are going to face real financial dip kind of July, August, September. Then you'll see European airlines fail.
Again, gas prices are surging for one reason only. Because Iran now controls the Strait of Hormuz and the 20% of global oil and gas gets shipped through it. Before Trump's war, well, Trump and Netanyahu's war, let's give full credit here, 150 ships a day passed through that strait freely. Today, just 6 commercial ships passed through the strait, according to NBC News. The Iranian news agency says one of them was a Japanese tanker that paid Iran a toll in Chinese currency. And now, to make matters even worse on this single part of the fallout from this war, right, that most people are going to experience, gas prices, Trump has decided the U.S. is going to do its own blockade to blockade Iran's blockade of the strait. That bottleneck is causing global shortages, massive disruptions in billions of lives. I mean, people could die from starvation because of fertilizer shortages. Like this could get really out of control. There's also an interesting other phenomena happening, which is that governments and consumers are starting to shift decidedly against combustion engines. Why should we depend on this commodity that goes up in price? Pivoting to electric cars and renewable energies. They're doing that just as the Trump administration is announcing another deal to pay 2 energy companies nearly $1 billion of federal money, our money, to pay them to stop building wind farms, to not bring new clean energy onto the grid, and to shift to oil and gas. So here we are. Donald Trump launched a war against Iran 3 months ago. He can't figure out how to kind of actually end it, right? It's in this tenuous, frozen conflict ceasefire. And he can't because, frankly, he's manifestly bored by the whole thing. He's over it. He has much more important things on his mind, like a grand golden ballroom where the East Wing used to be. And Republicans are now committed to indulging him with your money.
We're going to introduce legislation that would authorize $400 million to be spent to secure to build the presidential ballroom.
I support Trump building a ballroom, yes, of course, especially after this weekend.
I'm working on legislation to ensure that we are getting the ballroom funded. It's obviously a national security element to that, and it needs to be done.
This has to be addressed. At a minimum, we have to have a safe place to protect the President of the United States and the cabinet officials if they want to gather, or there's a state dinner.
Boy, how did 2.5 centuries of American presidents ever handle a state dinner without this ballroom? And as Republicans rush to use our money that could go for a million different things, right? For a new wing in Versailles for the would-be king, our Justice Department is being turned into a private vengeance squad for enemies of the court. Trump's Department of Justice indicted former FBI Director James Comey again. This comes after a judge tossed the first transparently ludicrous, politically motivated prosecution against him last year. Comey's now facing charges related to this now deleted Instagram photo he posted last May, of shells on a beach spelling out the message 8647. The claim, literally spelled out in the indictment, is that this was James Comey threatening to murder the president. He was indicted today for those seashells. Even Trump's acting attorney general, his former criminal defense attorney, Todd Blanche, had a little trouble sounding confident about the case today.
There's been a tremendous amount of investigation. And how do you prove intent in any case? You prove intent with witnesses, with documents, with the defendant himself to the extent it's appropriate. And that's how we'll prove intent in this case.
Really? Going to prove intent that he was posting that on Instagram for everyone to say to threaten the president with violence, the former director of the FBI, that was his intent. That's what you're going to prove. I don't think the federal case is going to survive very long, but it's what Trump wants. Just like he has always wanted ABC's late night host Jimmy Kimmel taken off the air. He tried last year. They kind of got their butts kicked, brushed back quite a bit. Now he's trying again. On Monday, the president and First Lady Melania Trump put out separate posts calling for Kimmel's firing over a one-line joke he told last week. Today, like clockwork, in an obvious appeal to the boss, Trump's FCC, led by his handpicked chairman, Brendan Carr, the guy who basically talked about doing it the easy way or the hard way the last time with Jimmy Kimmel, announced they were breaking protocol to review the broadcast licenses of ABC's top 8 network affiliates in major cities from New York to LA. On a right-wing podcast today, which is the same place he got himself in trouble in the past, Carr suggested the incredibly sudden license review as part of a deeper probe into parent company Disney for its DEI policies. SEC Commissioner Ana Gomez is joining us later in the show to discuss Trump's war on Kimmel. And we're going to be speaking with Congressman Jamie Raskin shortly on the new indictment of James Comey. But all of this mad king behavior, all of these obsessions, that's what Trump occupies himself with now. That's where he's focused. You can get this guy to talk about, like, opening the Strait of Hormuz or, financial policy, economic policy. He wants the ballroom. He wants the people he hates to suffer. He wants his face and signature on American passports. Not making this one up. Here's what that might look like, according to images released by the State Department today. Our nearly 80-year-old president's authoritarian obsession with remaking America in his weird and warped image is consuming him and distracting him from, again, I can't emphasize this enough, the enormous international crisis he caused and that still is there. And the lasting tangible damage that is doing around the world from the Middle East to the middle of your driveway.
Top story this second hour of Morning Joe is a group of Senate Republicans pushing to fund the construction of President Trump's 90,000 square foot ballroom using taxpayer money. Who would be surprised by this? The effort is being led by Senator and close Trump ally Lindsey Graham, who said yesterday he wants Congress to pass legislation that would provide $400 million for the ballroom's construction, citing security concerns in the wake of the White House Correspondents' Dinner shooting.
Underneath this ballroom will be infrastructure that is national security centric. The ballroom itself will avoid the dilemma of having to leave the White House grounds with future presidents and this president's to go downtown in a place that's less secure. I'd like to vote as soon as possible to accelerate what America needs, a secure facility for the president and others to meet in, to have a good time, to enjoy themselves without putting the nation at risk.
All right, this is preposterous. First of all, a federal judge has stopped construction of the ballroom, but has allowed them to move forward with the underground secure location. So to make sure that there are no questions about whether stopping the Marie Antoinette Memorial Ballroom has anything to do with national security. It will not. That's the first thing. The second thing that is preposterous is the fact that they're saying, oh, well, we need this ballroom because things have gotten so dangerous out there. They have. I've expressed concerns. Mika and I have said time and time again, it's preposterous, and they can never again have so many cabinet members and the president, the vice president of the United States in one place that is not as secured as the United States Capitol.
As decided by the Trump White House.
And the Hilton is not secure. It's just not secure. I'm not going to go into the details of all the things that Iran could have done to push back. It doesn't take an imagination to figure that out, but it would have been very easy to do. So they cannot go back to the Hilton. It is a national security risk. That said, building the Marie Antoinette Ballroom is not the reaction to that. On keeping things more secure. You have to find better locations. So you could
make better decisions about security at that event. Through the administration, which put it at a lower level.
I've got to say,
Seth, Marco Rubio, J.D. Vance, the President of the United States, Kash Patel, all in the same room? Are you kidding?
Scott Bessent in an old hotel that just wasn't secure. Other Republicans also less enthusiastic about the Lindsey plan, among them Senators Rand Paul, Josh Hawley, Rick Scott, and others who say private funding is the right way to go. And Senator Scott said, we have a $39 trillion debt. Maybe we ought to stop spending money. So far, the only Democrat, John Fetterman, has come out in favor of the project. But, you know, John Lemire, how do you sit back and talk about security when the Washington Post is reporting that they actually had less security at this dinner by choice, by the White House's choice, than they should have had? I mean, we're at a stage now where the stakes are so much higher, especially after all of the blunders in Butler, Pennsylvania, which I must say still baffle me. I'm still stunned by the mistakes of Butler, Pennsylvania. And I'm still surprised what happened at the Hilton the other night. But you look at drone warfare, you look at all the other capabilities that we've seen break out in the Ukraine-Russia war. We are going to have to take a second look at not only what events we do, but how we run our national campaigns, how we secure presidential candidates, how we secure audiences for presidential candidates, because the whole world has changed. But that said, all of these Republicans blindly following the talking points the White House put out right after the shooting is really a bit insulting, and even some Republicans are calling that out. Yes, we need the president safe. We need the president secure. That does not mean we need to blindly throw taxpayer money at this time at one of the president's pet projects.
Yeah, and let's just be clear about a couple of things. Even if the ballroom existed now, the White House Correspondents' Dinner would not be there. It is not a White House event. It's a different organization. And there are questions about the coziness of that weekend to begin with, but that's a line that would never be crossed. The Correspondents Association is not going to hold its event in a government building, particularly the White House, the man that, who they cover, his home. That's just not going to happen. Secondly, the president has actually said repeatedly, I mean, there have been questions about it, but the ballroom would be funded with private money. Has not asked, at least not publicly, for government funding on this. But now Senator Graham is seemingly eager to give him that. And this isn't going to happen, though. I mean, enough Republicans have already come out against it. This seems like a non-starter. It's Lindsey Graham currying favor with the commander in chief. But Willie, it does just speak again, though, to as Joe was saying, the blind loyalty from so many Republicans that also makes them we keep coming back to this theme, seem out of touch. Like, why is this your priority? Why are you focused on a ballroom? The national security argument is nonsense. Why are you doing that as opposed to doing things that actually improve voters' lives?
And in the immediate aftermath, presumably a traumatic event, standing in your tuxedo in the briefing room and going right to this issue, talking about the ballroom. I mean, it's not surprising, of course, that Senator Graham is carrying water for President Trump. That seems to be his job. But the question is they all saying, is Lindsey Graham saying, is the president saying the president's never going to leave the White House again? Because, of course, there are security questions anytime he leaves the White House to go anywhere. Do they want to create a bubble where he goes from the residence to the Oval and then occasionally at night over to the ballroom? That seems to be what they're saying, rather than saying, hey, let's have this event at a more secure place when we do it in the future. Let's bring in contributing writer of The Atlantic, Eugene Robinson, and politics bureau chief and senior political columnist at Politico, Jonathan Martin. J. Mart, let's start with you on this. Just your reaction to what happened on Saturday night, and also now this conversation about the ballroom. As Joe said, the talking points almost verbatim went out from a group of supporters of the president, politicians, podcasters, with the same phrase, we must have the ballroom. Effectively, if you don't think we should have a ballroom now, you hate America and you hate the president.
Yeah, I mean, I can't say it's the most profound call for justice in the history of the Western world. We must build the ballroom now. What do we want? The ballroom. When do we want it? Tomorrow. I can't really hear the chant, but I think something that's sort of being forgotten here is the American taxpayer is not crying out to subsidize the D.C. banquet circuit in perpetuity. I think people forget this. You build a ballroom on the White House grounds. Guess what? You're going to have to pay for the grounds crew, for the wait staff, for the security. Are you telling me that the American taxpayer for decades to come is going to be on the hook for every damn D.C. fancy dinner? I can't think of anything that the American voter would like less than subsidizing the press and politicians for putting on black tie and partying together in D.C. That probably would test at like 397, if I had to guess, Willie. So I think this is not that well thought through. But understandably, I think there's an instinct to try to find a way to create some better security measures in light of what happened on Saturday night. It clearly, in hindsight, is regrettable that you had the entire government in one room, given the threat there and given the lack of security around the Hilton. I'm just skeptical that the answer is having taxpayers subsidize a series of events for decade and decade in which D.C. elites are going to put on black tie and hang out. Doesn't seem to me to be a good use of taxpayer money.
Yeah, and Gene, I don't think the White House Correspondents' Press Association would do this anyway. They wouldn't accept that there was going to be some kind of event at the White House.
No, they wouldn't. They would never have the event at the White House.
And I don't think the president would like this. The president likes getting out around the country. So what, you're going to keep the president confined to the White House compound for the whole of his 4-year tenure in order to ensure 100% guaranteed security? You can't do that if you have a president, and any presidents want to go out and travel around the country.
You can't do that. What you could do, for example, is at least put the highest security designation on an event like the White House Correspondents' Dinner, where when you know it's at the Hilton, which everyone knows is not a really secure place. I mean, there are so many entrances and exits. It's very difficult to manage that space. So I would have thought that it would certainly have rated the highest security designation. I don't understand how that happened. And so we need to know that. The ballroom is just a complete boondoggle to begin with. Number one, I think it's not needed at all. You don't need a huge ballroom at the White House. I think one of the charms and one of the great things about the White House is its lack of that kind of grandeur, and the fact that it's a house. And it has a big room where you can have a dinner. You know, I went to one state dinner, and it was under Obama, and it was a state dinner for China. They did it inside the White House itself, in the East Room. There are about 200 people there. If you can do a state dinner for China inside the building, you could do a state dinner for anybody inside the building. You don't need this huge Marie Antoinette appendage, yet he's determined to have it.
You know, Caddy, there's so many things you could actually help us on here. First of all, talk about the ongoing battle with British taxpayers, complaining about the upkeep for Buckingham Palace, the upkeep for all of the royal residences. The upkeep, that's something that the British taxpayers have had 1,000 years to get used to. Americans, not so much. This, I think, will be an ongoing problem here. Secondly, though, the royalty does have Buckingham Palace. And yet, King Charles, obviously, as we know, gets out of it. And he goes to places that have to be secured. Queen Elizabeth II constantly was going out and doing ribbon cuttings, doing garden parties. And by the way, they were active targets of the IRA for decades. I mean, you look at what happened to Lord Mountbatten. They constantly were under attack by the IRA. So it's not like, oh, the royals, nobody wanted to kill them. No, there was people actively wanted to kill them all the time. But they didn't just build a palace and stay inside there. And this idea, this Republican idea that somehow Donald Trump is going to be like a king, they're going to build a ballroom and he will be forever secure, is just nonsense. It is a false choice, isn't it?
Yeah. This is the moment where I'm allowed to gratuitously mention that I was at the garden party yesterday at the British Embassy for the King and Queen.
Exactly. Show the picture. Yeah.
And then show the picture. But the security, you had the King and Queen of Great Britain at a garden party with 600 people, fully outdoors. I'm sure there was security, but it wasn't a security that felt oppressive in any way. We had our bags checked briefly. We had our IDs checked. And the whole thing went off as planned. But imagine if the King and Queen couldn't do that visit. Imagine if a president couldn't do what the president wants to do because for some reason you want to guarantee his absolute security, and so they're never allowed to leave some hermetically sealed bubble. I mean, there's a risk with these people being remote from their publics as it is. I mean, there's a risk from the king being remote from his people. There's a risk of a president not being in touch with his people. If you try to guarantee, you cannot guarantee 100% security for any principal unless, you stick them in a room and never let them leave.
Was the Ted Cruz photobomb of that picture planned, Kathy? Because it's a great,
good, wasn't it?
Great Ted Cruz shot behind you.
I took Ted Cruz Lutnick.
Was that AI or was that real?
No.
Look, there he is. You can see him.
I'm not a journalist for nothing. I knew he was standing behind me.
And
Lutnick was there too.
Oh, Howard Lutnick's right there too.
Queuing for a long time to shake hands with the monarch. May I just say?
Hey,
you love
J-Mart.
us still.
Yeah, Mike.
We like to think not.
J-Mart, I have a question for you, and for anybody who can answer this question. I've never had it answered, and I've asked it several times with regard to the ballroom. How is it that the President of the United States, Donald Trump, got away with literally overnight destroying the White House, tearing down the White House? It's not his house. It doesn't belong to him. It belongs to the American taxpayers. And yet nobody has really said anything. I've seen larger projects and smaller projects from state to state tied up by the courts, and they never happen. How is it that this has happened?
Because he can, is the short answer. The longer answer is because the law is somewhat vague on this, and he's not going to wait for the vagaries of the law. He's going to start the construction, which is what he did. I think there were plenty of folks in Congress who didn't like it. They weren't sure what they could do, but it was too late once the bulldozers came in, and there wasn't much they could do about it. Look, I think part of the challenge with not having either chamber of Congress, Mike, is that you can't use the appropriations process. As Joe knows, when you pass the annual spending bills, you oftentimes can pass these riders to the bills in which no money shall be spent for this purposes. And I think if Democrats had at least one chamber of Congress, you certainly would have seen an effort to amend the spending bills for the federal government to block any use of federal dollars to dynamite the East Wing. And they couldn't get that through. They don't have a majority in either chamber of Congress, obviously. Now, what's interesting, guys, is if Democrats do have the Congress next year, I'm sure you will see an effort in spending bills beginning in 2027 to bar any federal dollars for fill in the blank. The new ballroom, the Arc de Triomphe, any kind of anything related to Trumpian grandeur, I assume Democrats in Congress are going to try to block.
Yeah, and just to Mike's question, by the way, remember that Trump lied. He said we're not going to tear anything down. Yeah, right. He said we're going to be construction, but we're not going to destroy anything. And then, almost in the dead of night, he just tore down the East Wing. And it was a fait accompli. By the time anybody knew what was happening, the machines had torn down half the building.
Like the Colts leaving Baltimore in the middle of the night.
Exactly. He pulled in hearsay.
Exactly.
In case you were wondering, 27 is the answer. Weeks left until the midterm elections in November. On that, the New York Times reports this, quote, in private, Republican political strategists are grimly trading synonyms to describe the darkening environment. Sour, ugly, bad, bleak. They note that much can change before November, holding out hope that the days of $4 gas and the war in Iran pass before the election. But crossing one's fingers and toes isn't exactly a political strategy, not even for MAGA. Indeed, just today, AAA revealed a new high watermark for gas prices in America since Donald Trump began the war in Iran. Nearly $4.18 a gallon, the highest average since 2022, shortly after Russia invaded Ukraine. And it's not over. This forecast from Politico, quote, supply of oil, especially in Europe and Asia, is dwindling, and a price shock is coming. That's according to Dan Pickering, Chief Investment Officer at Pickering Energy Partners. He said that when the summer driving season begins, there will be another gas price shock that, quote, hits people in the face. There's a day of reckoning coming, he said. And understand this, gas prices are but a single thread in a much larger economic calamity where Americans appear to feel more squeezed than at any point in decades. Gallup's annual economy and personal finance survey released today paints an historically bad picture. The share of Americans who say their financial situation is getting worse now stands at 55%, the highest figure in 25 years. I want to bring into our coverage Democratic pollster and political analyst Cornell Belcher. Also joining us, political analyst, the host of the Bulwark podcast, Tim Miller's here. Cornell, how do you see this moment?
It is a unique moment on a number of fronts, right? Where I'm struck by that Gallup number, right? It's the worst number than we've seen in the last 25 years. And Nicole, that that counts into recessions when we were literally in recessions. So you have the Americans feeling more anxious and stressed out economically. You also have a lot of polling out there around sort of how they're feeling more anxious and stressed out about the war. And at the same time, you look at inside the polling and the Fox poll that came out the other day, and again, it's some numbers that I don't see very often because Democrats now have taken advantage on dealing with the economy, something that historically Republicans have. It baffles me why, but Republicans have historically had an advantage of with Americans, and Democrats have an advantage now of dealing with inflation in the economy. And then you juxtapose that, Nicole, with what I was watching earlier today when Senator Graham was announcing that they're going to roll out how they're going to spend $400 million on the president's ballroom. And you look at the Comey stuff you've just been covering, and you wonder why Americans are upset, and you wonder why Republicans are worried about the midterm elections. Because, Nicole, they're not focusing on anything having to do with the economic stress and angst of the vast majority of Americans. All of their policies and all of their politics right now seem to be to make happy or play to the vanity and the narcissism of one individual and not the American people. We've been talking a lot about, superpower suicide over the last couple of, days with historians talking about superpower political suicide. Nicole, I'm watching Republicans commit political party suicide by following him down this rabbit hole.
Yeah, I mean, Tim, I'm struck by how they are still doing what has worked for them, right? And so they have I guess we're to think it's a coincidence that today, on the day that a federal judge allowed Maureen Comey to sue DOJ indicted Jim Comey, and it might be, I don't know. I'm not the coincidence arbiter in America, but I can see two dots and say they're next to each other. But the three things that have permeated the electorate's mind, right? Epstein. There were lies told by Donald Trump and Kash Patel and Pam Bondi, and the Epstein class is viewed to still be unknown and unrevealed. The Iran war, both the idea of a forever war and the impact on the economy that we're talking about. And the collapse, whether you internalized who Viktor Orban was or not. If you're in MAGA, he was daddy, right? He was big daddy. And Tucker went and kissed his shoes, and Matt Schlapp went and kissed his shoes, and J.D. Vance went and kissed his shoes 8 hours before he lost, and he fell on his face. And so whether you're telling pollsters who you're going to vote for or not, there are these three seismic things which are a lot more enduring and a lot more visceral than any of the freneticism that they seem to be pushing through the information pipeline. And I wonder what you make of he's really in a very stable place with the public, and it sucks. He's in the low 30s.
Yeah, stable and kind of a slow decline, kind of like the green slope on a ski slope. But I think that's right, Nicole. And think about what they've tried to do. And you mentioned the Comey indictment, which is just so laughable and so ridiculous. Like we can't say 8647 in the country anymore. Like the president's going to indict us over that. It's absolutely preposterous, and I know that Jim Comey will fight it and succeed. But the other story lately that I think is really telling about his political standing is this ballroom nonsense, right? That after the horrible events at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, everybody gets on this message point of, oh, Trump needs a new ballroom because he's under attack, and we need this for him to honor him and to be safe. And they did something very successfully. They've done very successfully in the past, which is marshal the entire echo chamber. If you turned on Fox at all today, they were talking about the ballroom. If you looked at a Republican politician's social social media feed, they were talking about the ballroom. You know, if you were on Twitter and following a right-wing account, they talked about the ballroom. And like, this is what they're good at. They're good at like getting everybody on message and creating these stories out of nonsense. The other thing that they're good at is attacking their foes and smearing them, people like Jim Comey. And you can see like the machine operating right now, but it's not getting them anything. Like, they're not gaining any ground. Like, that machine works very well when the other side is in charge, right? And you gin everybody up to smear them and tear them down. It works decently well if everybody's feeling good about what you're doing. And you're just now giving them this shiny object to pay attention to distract them from whatever little problems they have in their life. Like, the machine doesn't work if everybody's pissed at you already, right? If people are like, why are we in this war? And you showed the gas prices at the beginning of this. I just saw a report, I think in the upper Midwest in particular, gas prices are about to go up a bunch in the next week or two because of issues at the refineries and shortages. And we're going to keep seeing this all the way through the summer. It's going to be $5 gas this summer. And it already is that in some states on the coast. So like, if things are getting worse for people, and if they're not responding to the things that they cared about, whether that be Epstein or the gas prices or whatever, like, this whole machine is just, it's a little masturbatory, right? It's just like, okay, it's who's it for? It's for the people that are, you know, the remaining 33% that are still on board. It's not, you know, doing anything for them. It's not making any progress.
I also, like, can we put the picture up of Trump holding his gold ballroom? Like, I think every Democrat should make this their Twitter profile. Like, this is a guy whose population and citizenry, the one with all the gold, Trump hold it there. This should be the picture that this is your president at a time when 13 U.S. service members have lost their lives in a war he started with Iran, in a meeting in which his entire national security cabinet did not support going to that war. This is your president at a time when gas hits a record that it hasn't hit in a quarter century. This is what your president is doing at a time when the grift is undeniable, even to MAGA. This is what Donald Trump is doing when he loses two of the biggest mouthpieces in the MAGA media movement. He is holding a little tiny picture of a big gold ballroom. This is where, and I think we should go with this. And I think if he did a press conference about his news conference, it would be the one Trump event I'd be tempted to take live, because this is what he cares about. He does not give a rat's ass about a single person who voted for him to make their life better. Cornell, what do we do with this?
I think you're right. I think it's sort of self-explanatory. I mean, you show that image, up against the image of struggling, people at the gas pump paying out, these crazy prices for gas and struggling to put food on their table. And it kind of makes, it kind of speaks for itself, right? And again, I am just baffled. I've been in Washington politics for a long time, but I'm just baffled at the disconnect here and how all the Republicans are following him right down this rabbit hole, this pathway. It's remarkable to me because
it's not a rabbit hole, though. It's like a padded gold room. I mean, I just it's like let them all go in there, and for the ones that need the padding, we'll pad it. I mean, I'll buy the donuts. Like, this is their plan.
Why would you be holding press conferences talking about giving this man $400 million for a ballroom? Americans are struggling at the pump and at the grocery store. Look, Democrats should have a very good year. And again, I was not bullish on the ideal of Democrats taking the Senate. I am growing more bullish on the ideal that even the Senate is in play now than I was 2 or 3 months ago.
Yeah, I mean, and I think if he keeps carrying that little picture around, bullish might be the right word. Cornell, thank you for joining us on all this today.
Joining me now, Ty Cobb, former White House attorney during Trump's first term. It's good to see you again, Ty. So you have this ballroom. It is still subject to litigation. Would a judge reviewing this case take last night's incident into consideration, do you think?
Not at all. We've never heard this argument before for the ballroom. Certainly the, tragic incident last night involving political violence, which, sadly is part of our culture in large part because of the gun issues that your guest, Kerry Kennedy, highlighted. Instead of talking about the real problems like guns, Trump has turned the incident into an advertisement for his vanity project. This ballroom is not being created to establish a safe place for him to celebrate himself. And the courts, have stopped it in large part, although it's proceeding under scrutiny at this stage of the game, and because of the fact that Trump ignored the law. He believes, as Stephen Miller and Stephen Vaught tell him every day, that he can do whatever he wants, and that's just not true, as we saw with tariffs, as we've seen with multiple deployments of ICE and the National Guard. The courts have stepped up and said, no, Mr. President, you can't do anything you want. There are laws to be followed. And here the issues are, is congressional approval required? Were adequate environmental and regulatory considerations addressed? And they weren't. So I think at some point, this will be reined in a little bit. It'll certainly be slowed down. Congress would likely, at least before the midterms, approve it for the president in a tight vote between the Mikey Johnson-controlled House and the Democrats. But at the same time, if that's to be the case, it needs to be done.
So Donald Trump is saying that the ballroom that he's building would have been a safer location. But the question to you, would a private event hosted by, as last night was, the White House Correspondents Association, would it actually have access to and be held in the White House ballroom? I mean, would this ballroom be used by non-governmental or non-White House events? Could any group rent the ballroom for the right price?
Highly unlikely, although if the price is paid to Trump and his family, perhaps so, as we've seen with the $4 billion to which he's enriched himself over the last 15 months. But no, and it's not likely to be. It's not likely to ever be used for a private event. To the extent it is, it'll be a significant mega donor to the Republican Party. To the extent it ever does get built. And with regard to the safety, this is him trying to merely pressure the courts into ignoring the law, as he's tried in connection with many other issues. Threatening judges and trying to intimidate judges, trying to do anything to assimilate power within the presidency. And now he's taking over the White House Correspondents Association, dictating when they can have their event, insisting that it be rescheduled. All things that should be up to them independently. And frankly, why they would even do that for a man who has spent 15 months trying to destroy the First Amendment and criticized journalists, kicked him out of the Pentagon, and had his allies take over CBS and other media outlets. I have no idea, what level of complicity the White House Correspondents Group feels.
So can I ask you, based on your knowledge of the president, it has been suggested that the president's implying, hey, look, this would be the safest place. It's the best place for a president to be, or at least the best place for me to be if we had an event in the White House ballroom. That being said, that would indicate the president wouldn't get out in the public, would no longer be out there with Americans, touching base with constituents, losing a sense of touch with people if he were to harness himself in for all these events and stay safe at the White House. What's your thought on that? Does the president enjoy getting out there and talking to people, or would he rather have a sort of northern Mar-a-Lago set up for himself?
Well, he'd much rather have a northern Mar-a-Lago and have people, come to him and celebrate him on his turf. But he does like getting out. He loves spectacle. Anything that gives him the sense that he's all powerful, he does enjoy that. But we already see a little bit of that, Alex. I mean, he does hunker down in Mar-a-Lago. And keep in mind that, many in his cabinet and many high-ranking officials, hide on Coast Guard and military facilities now where they live. And Todd Blanche had to move his family to the bubble of nearby Mar-a-Lago and move them out of New York. So I think you see between, the Noams of the world, the Hegseths, the others, who are now hunkering down in secure facilities, that, this is an administration that is hiding from the people, and it's in large part because they're taking advantage of us all.
Ty Cobb, always good to talk with you, which means I'll see you again soon. Thank you so much.
Can't wait. Thank you, Alex.